269 people died so your phone could tell you where you are. That's the legend anyway. A lost airliner, a Soviet missile, and a horrified American president who gave the world his military's crown jewel for free. It's the noblest origin story in technology, and it has a hole in it 17 years wide. In 2019, the US government priced what GPS quietly gives the American economy, $1.4 trillion. Your share of the bill, $0. Here's the thesis. Up front, free is a price. Somebody always pays it, and by the end you'll know who pays for GPS and where the off switch is. First, 90 seconds on what GPS actually is, because almost everything people assume about it is backwards. GPS is not a map. It's a clock, about 31 satellites, each carrying atomic clocks doing nothing but broadcasting the time and their own position, over and over, forever. Your phone listens to 4 or more of them, measures the tiny differences in when each signal arrives, and computes where it must be standing for those delays to make sense. The satellites never hear from you, they don't know you exist. But because GPS is really a clock, it seeped into places that have no maps at all. Cell towers time their handoffs with it, power grids keep their current in step with it, stock exchanges timestamp trades with it. By the time you finish breakfast, your phone has checked that military clock dozens of times. So has your bank, so has your power company. The blue dot is the visible 1% of the dependence. Hold that thought, it's the whole story later. So where did the free clock come from? The story everyone tells begins at night over the Sea of Japan. It's the last night of August, 1983. Korean Airlines Flight 07 lifts off from Anchorage for Seoul, 269 people aboard, including a sitting U.S. congressman. Minutes after takeoff, Captain Chun Byung-in's crew engages the autopilot. Somewhere in that routine, this is what investigators eventually concluded. The aircraft is left following a fixed compass heading instead of its programmed route. A few degrees of error. No alarm, no indication. Just a silent drift that widens for 5 hours until a civilian 747 is deep inside Soviet airspace, and nobody aboard knows. In the cockpit, nothing looks wrong. The crew makes routine position reports that no longer match where the airplane actually is, and no instrument aboard can tell them so. Below them, Kamchatka, Sakhalin, some of the most militarized territory on Earth, on a night the Soviet air defense net is already jumpy from an American reconnaissance mission hours earlier. A Soviet interceptor pulls alongside in the dark. Its pilot, Gennady Osipovich, fires warning bursts, invisible at night. He would say years later he could see the airliner's blinking navigation lights. Moscow's command net decides it's a spy plane, 2 missiles. The 747 falls for 12 minutes into the Sea of Japan. Everyone aboard dies. 2 weeks later, President Reagan makes the announcement the legend remembers: when the Pentagon's new global positioning system is ready, it will be opened to civilian use, so a navigation error can never kill like this again. The gift, on the record. Case closed, pull the thread. Go back into the engineering record. GPS was approved in 1973, a full decade before the tragedy, architected by an Air Force colonel named Bradford Parkinson. And the civilian signal was already in the design. From day one, every satellite carried 2 codes, a precise, encrypted one for the military and a coarse, open one anyone could receive. The first satellite had gone up in 1978, 5 years before the tragedy. The receivers of the era were the size of suitcases and cost like cars. So Reagan wasn't handing over the crown jewels. He was, in large part, promising the blueprint, a promise that was cheap precisely because delivery was years away. Which raises the sharper question nobody asks. If civilians were always getting a signal, what did the military do to it? They blurred it. On purpose. It was called Selective Availability, a deliberate, engineered error injected into the civilian signal, smearing your position across the length of a football field. Precise enough to keep an airliner out of Soviet airspace, too crude to aim anything. The gift, wearing a blindfold. An entire industry grew up squinting through that blindfold. Surveyors cheated it with fixed reference stations. Fishermen and hikers bought receivers anyway and lived with the smear. Then, in 1991, the policy humiliated itself. Desert Storm, the US military, sole owner of the precise signal, didn't have enough military receivers for its own troops. So it shipped thousands of civilian units to the desert. Families reportedly mailed store-bought receivers to soldiers and quietly turned its own blur down so those civilian units could fight a war. The blindfold, removed by its inventor the moment it got inconvenient, After the war, the blur went back on, and the world lived with it for 9 more years. In 1996, official policy promised to end it within a decade, a promise with a comfortable horizon. But then it happened early. On May 1, 2000, the White House announced selective availability would end at midnight that night. Civilian GPS had been a promise for 17 years. Whole industries had grown up assuming the blur was permanent. Some engineers had spent entire careers working around it. In monitoring stations around the world, they watched their error plots scatter clouds 100 meters wide, humming along as they had for a decade. Midnight. The clouds collapsed tenfold in moments, a planet snapping into focus in its sleep. It may be the largest overnight upgrade any technology has ever received, and it cost the users nothing. So, generosity finally delivered? Look at what actually changed the calculus that spring. 2 things, and neither one is charity. First, money. By 2000, GPS was hatching industries, surveying, aviation, shipping, and the whisper of something bigger once phones got involved. The blur had become a tax on the American future. But second, and the legend never mentions this, the Pentagon had learned to deny GPS regionally, blind an enemy over one battlefield while the rest of the planet stays sharp. Once you can switch off a region, blinding everyone is just bad business. Turn those 2 facts over, and the gift inverts. Free wasn't charity. Free was strategy. A world that runs its planes, grids, and markets on your military's clock is a world invested in your continuity. And in 2007, Washington made a strategy permanent. Future GPS satellites wouldn't even carry the selective availability hardware. The blindfold wasn't just off, it was designed out of existence. The tragedy gave the policy its story. The design of 1973 gave it its signal. The calculus of 2000 gave it its teeth. The gift came with a receipt. The rest of the world understood perfectly. That's why the sky now holds 4 navigation constellations, not 1, Europe's Galileo, Russia's GLONASS, China's Beidou. None of them needed to exist. The American signal is free, global, and excellent. They exist because every major power ran the same thought experiment. What if, on the day it matters, the free signal isn't there for us? And that fear has stopped being hypothetical. In the first 4 months of 2025 alone, industry tracking counted more than 122,000 flights hit by GPS jamming and spoofing, airline instruments lying to their crews near conflict zones. Spoofed ships have reported positions at airports, miles inland. Crews on some routes now cross entire regions flying the pre-GPS world on life support, inertial platforms, radio beacons, paper procedure. In 2025, the UN's aviation body formally condemned Russia over the interference. The blindfold is gone, the off switch never left. One military's free clock holding up the world, and the world has started checking its own wrist. Here's the pattern to keep. Free is a price. Zero-cost infrastructure creates the deepest lock-in of all. Nothing can compete with free, so alternatives die and nobody audits a gift. You've watched this lens work on this channel before. The 19-inch rack locked in because nobody questioned it. The internet's addresses ran out because the workaround was comfortable. GPS locks harder than either, because leaving costs everything and staying costs nothing. And unlike a rack standard, nobody can fork GPS. You can't run a constellation out of a garage. The exit price is a space program, which is exactly what the exit cost Europe, Russia, and China. Even Washington knows the dependence is a problem. Congress ordered a backup timing system for critical infrastructure back in 2018. Years later, it still isn't fully deployed. The free clock is simply too good and too free. Now run the lens across your own life. The free maps, the free email, the free login button on every website, each one genuinely excellent and each one an off switch someone else holds. Which free thing is your life actually built on? Tell me in the comments. I read all of them. One last thing about that flawless clock in the sky. GPS keeps its calendar by counting weeks in a register so small it overflows every couple of decades, and unpatched receivers wake up believing it's 1980. It's happened twice already, 1999 and 2019, a tiny, scheduled apocalypse, the little cousin of the most famous digital deadline in history. You remember that one, planes falling, banks erased, midnight of the millennium, and then nothing happened, and everyone laughed. Except that's not what happened, at all. Next time, the $300 billion nothing, the apocalypse that got cancelled. Consider liking and subscribing for more load-bearing history videos.